Maggie stood on the busy corner of Main Street, her guitar resting on her lap. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the pavement. She adjusted the strap of her worn-out bag, hoping it would collect enough coins to help her son, Timmy. The small, tattered sign next to her read, "Please help. My son is sick." Timmy had been sick for months. He had a serious illness, and the medical bills were piling up. Maggie did everything she could to get him the right treatment, but it wasn't enough. The money she earned from her job at the diner barely covered their rent, let alone the doctor's visits. She couldn't sit and wait for help to come. She had to do something. That's why she was here. Maggie was a good singer. She had always loved music. When Timmy was younger, they would sing together to pass the time, laughing as they made up silly songs about the world around them. But now, with Timmy's illness taking up so much of her energy, those joyful songs were just memories. Singing on the street corner, hoping for a few dollars, was all she could think of to make ends meet. She took a deep breath, closed her eyes, and strummed her guitar. The soft, sweet notes of a lullaby began to fill the air. She wasn't trying to impress anyone. This song was for Timmy. Her voice, full of warmth and tenderness, carried over the street, floating to anyone who would listen. The melody was simple, but it came from the heart. The people walking by barely noticed her, lost in their own lives and problems. A few dropped some loose change into her guitar case, but not many. Maggie didn't mind. She knew this wasn't about the money. Not really. It was about hope. Every note she sang was a prayer that somehow something would change. She sang louder now, letting the music fill the silence around her. She could almost picture Timmy lying in bed at home, his small body too weak to do much more than smile when she came in to check on him. She wished she could do more, be more, for him. As the hours passed, Maggie's voice began to grow hoarse. Her fingers were sore from playing the guitar so long, but she didn't stop. She had to keep going. She couldn't give up now. The evening sky turned dark, and the streetlights flickered on, casting their glow over the sidewalk. A few people stopped to listen, drawn in by the sadness in her voice. A man in a suit stopped for a moment, looking at her with interest. Maggie's eyes briefly met his, but she didn't let herself get distracted. She had to keep singing, even though her body was tired and her heart heavy. Little did she know, this night was different. Tonight, her song would reach someone who could change everything for her and Timmy. As she finished another verse, her tired eyes noticed something. A shiny Cadillac had pulled up in front of the store. She didn't think much of it at first. People stopped by it all the time. But this time, the car didn't drive away. It stayed. The man in the car was watching her. And for the first time in a long while, Maggie felt like someone truly understood the struggle she was going through. Maybe, just maybe, this was the moment that would change everything. Her song continued, louder now, filled with hope and heart. Maggie's fingers moved over the guitar strings, creating a soft rhythm. The song she sang wasn't complicated, but it held deep meaning. It was a lullaby she had sung to Timmy when he was younger, a song to comfort him when he was scared. Tonight, though, it felt different. She wasn't singing it to calm him. She was singing it for herself. The night was quiet except for the soft sound of her voice and the hum of the car engines passing by. People walked by, some paying her no attention, others slowing down for a moment to listen. But it didn't matter. Maggie had learned long ago that you couldn't depend on others to change your life. She had to do it herself. Her eyes focused on the road in front of her as she sang, her voice rising and falling with each note. She thought about Timmy lying in their small apartment, his face pale and tired. He had always been a strong little boy, full of energy, but his illness had taken that from him. The doctors told her there wasn't much more they could do unless they could get the right treatment she couldn't afford. Maggie pushed that thought away. She couldn't think about how impossible things felt. She had to believe that something would happen. She had to believe that singing, even in the cold night air on the street corner, would lead to something good. The lullaby she sang was full of love, full of hope. She sang for Timmy, and for the chance to make things right again. Each verse was a prayer, a request for help, for strength. She didn't care if anyone understood her pain. She just needed to be heard. As she sang, Maggie noticed something in the corner of her eye, a shadow moving closer. She paused for a second, thinking it was just another person walking by. But when she looked up, her heart skipped a beat. The Cadillac that had been parked earlier was still there, its engine quiet now. The driver's side door opened, and out stepped a man in a sharp suit. He didn't look like the other people passing by. He seemed different. Maggie quickly looked down, embarrassed. She wasn't used to being noticed by people like him. She kept her focus on her guitar, strumming the strings with slow, careful movements. The man stood a few feet away, watching her intently. He didn't speak right away, just listened. Her heart raced as she continued to sing. Was he just another person who wanted to see what was happening? Or was he someone who might help? She couldn't tell, but his presence was comforting in a strange way. The song seemed to mean more now, knowing someone was listening with care. Finally, the man spoke. "You have a beautiful voice," he said gently. Maggie looked up, surprised. He wasn't like the others who would toss a coin and hurry on. He was standing there, genuinely listening. "Thank you," she said quietly, her voice almost lost in the night. "I'm just trying to make sure my son gets the help he needs." The man stepped closer, his expression thoughtful. "Tell me about him. What's going on?" Maggie hesitated for a moment. This was the first time she told anyone outside of her close circle about Timmy's illness, but something about this man made her trust him, even if just a little. She looked at him, deciding that maybe, just maybe, this was the moment her song had been waiting for. "I've been trying everything I can, but it's not enough," she said. "I'm doing this, singing, hoping someone might hear and help." The man nodded slowly. "You know, sometimes help comes from places you never expect." Maggie wasn't sure what to make of his words, but the way he was looking at her made her feel like she wasn't alone anymore. "Would you like to talk more?" he asked. Maggie nodded, her heart full of hope. Maybe, just maybe, her song would lead her somewhere unexpected. The man in the sharp suit gave Maggie a kind smile before he gestured for her to follow him. "Come on, let's talk for a minute," he said softly, his voice calm and reassuring. Maggie hesitated. She wasn't sure what was happening. Everything felt so sudden. One moment, she was singing on the street, and now here was a stranger asking to talk to her. But there was something in his eyes, something that made her feel like she could trust him, even though she didn't fully understand why. She packed her guitar into its case and followed him across the street to the small cafe just a few doors down. The lights inside were warm and inviting, and for a moment, Maggie felt like she was stepping into another world, a world far from the cold, hard streets outside. They sat down at a small table near the window. Maggie felt a little out of place. This wasn't a place she usually go. The man ordered coffee, and Maggie asked for water. She wasn't sure if she should speak or wait for him to say something first, but the silence between them was comfortable. It didn't feel awkward at all, like it sometimes did when she had to talk to people she didn't know. He looked at her with a kind expression, studying her for a moment before speaking. "You were singing for your son, weren't you?" he asked. Maggie nodded, feeling her throat tighten. "Yeah, my son Timmy. He's been sick for a while. I've tried everything, but it's hard. We don't have the money for the right treatment, and I don't know what to do anymore." Her voice wavered as she spoke, the weight of her worry and exhaustion finally breaking through. The man listened carefully, his eyes never leaving hers. "I can see how much you love him. That's why you were out there, right? Singing to try and make a change." Maggie nodded again. "I don't know what else to do. I just want him to get better. I'd want him to have a chance." She looked down, unable to hold back the tears that had been threatening to fall all evening. It had been so hard to stay strong all this time, but now, with someone listening, it felt like a relief. The man reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small business card. He placed it gently on the table in front of her. "My name is Mr. Carter. I'm a philanthropist, and I've been looking for people who need help, real help. I think I can help you and your son." Maggie blinked, her eyes going wide with surprise. "Help? What do you mean?" "I can cover the medical expenses for your son. The treatments, the doctors, everything," Mr. Carter explained. His voice was steady, and there was a sense of confidence in it that made Maggie feel like he wasn't just talking. He really meant it. Maggie stared at the card in front of her, her mind racing. Was this real? Was this really happening? She had never expected something like this. All she had hoped for was a little bit of kindness, maybe a few dollars from her songs. But this was something else entirely. This was a lifeline. I don't know what to say," Maggie stammered, overwhelmed with emotion. "How can you help us?" Mr. Carter smiled kindly. "It's simple. I've seen people struggle like you, and I want to make a difference. Let's get your son the help he needs. You don't have to do this alone anymore." Maggie's heart skipped a beat. It was hard to believe, but something told her that this was the chance she had been waiting for. She didn't know why Mr. Carter was helping her. But in that moment, it didn't matter. All that mattered was that Timmy's chance for a better future had just become real. Tears welled up in Maggie's eyes, and she took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. "Thank you. Thank you so much." The words didn't feel like enough, but they were all she could say. Mr. Carter simply nodded, his expression kind and gentle. "You're welcome. Now, let's take the next step together." Maggie sat back in her chair, still processing what Mr. Carter had just said. Her mind was racing, and 1,000 thoughts went through her head. How could this man, a stranger, be so willing to help her? What did he expect in return? And most importantly, would this actually work? Could Timmy really get the treatment he needed? Mr. Carter seemed to notice the doubt in her eyes. He smiled reassuringly, almost as if he knew exactly what she was thinking. "I understand that this is a lot to take in," he said calmly, "but I've been in a position to help people before. And I can see that you're doing everything you can for your son." Maggie blinked, trying to understand. "But why? Why are you doing this for us?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. He paused for a moment, looking at her with a thoughtful expression. "It's not about why I'm doing this. It's about helping someone who truly needs it. I've been lucky in my life, and I've found that the more you give, the more you receive. Sometimes, giving means making a real difference in someone's life." His words seemed simple, but they carried a weight that made Maggie feel both humbled and confused. She had been struggling for so long, fighting every day to keep Timmy's spirits up, and now this man was offering help. It felt like a dream, but it also felt too good to be true. "I don't know how to thank you," Maggie said, her voice trembling with emotion. I don't know what to say." Mr. Carter smiled kindly. "You don't have to thank me. What matters is that your son gets the care he needs, and I believe you're doing the best you can for him." He paused, then added, "But there's one more thing I'd like to ask." Maggie raised an eyebrow, confused. "What do you mean?" Mr. Carter leaned forward slightly, his expression serious but not threatening. "I don't want you to feel like you owe me anything. However, I would like to help you in a way that goes beyond just the money. I want to share your story with others. I want people to see what a mother like you is capable of, what love and determination can do." Maggie frowned, unsure of what he meant. "Share my story. But I'm not." No, he interrupted gently. "I'm not talking about anything invasive, just a simple story. You have the power to inspire others, to show them that no matter how hard life gets, there's always hope. And I think your voice could make a difference. I've seen it before. People like you have a way of reaching others." Maggie's heart raced. Was he asking her to become a public figure? To tell the world about her struggles? She wasn't sure she was ready for that. She had never wanted attention. She had only wanted to take care of her son. Mr. Carter must have seen her hesitation. "You don't have to decide right now," he said quickly, sensing her discomfort. "Take your time. But know that there's a bigger purpose in sharing your story, something that could bring even more support for your son. You have the chance to reach people who understand what it's like to be in your shoes." Maggie thought for a moment. Her first instinct was to say no. She didn't want the spotlight. She just wanted to help Timmy. But she also realized that if her story could inspire others, maybe it would be worth it. Maybe this was her chance to make a real change, not just for her family, but for others facing the same challenges. I'll think about it," Maggie said finally. "I'm not sure I'm ready, but I'll think about it." Mr. Carter smiled warmly, nodding in understanding. "That's all I ask. Just remember, whatever you decide, I'm here to help." Maggie felt a strange sense of peace wash over her. For the first time in a long while, she didn't feel so alone. There was hope, real hope, for Timmy and for her future. And no matter what came next, Maggie knew she had taken the first step towards something better. The days that followed felt like a blur to Maggie. After meeting Mr. Carter, everything seemed to move faster than she could keep up with. She felt like her life had been turned upside down in the best way possible, and yet, part of her still couldn't fully believe what was happening. The first thing Mr. Carter did was arrange an appointment with the best doctor in the city. Timmy was able to get the treatment he so desperately needed, and soon after, he started showing signs of improvement. Maggie watched with tears in her eyes as her son's health slowly returned. It felt like a miracle. She had been so close to giving up, but now, things were changing. Timmy was no longer as weak as he had been. He could sit up in bed, smile, and even talk again. It was as if the cloud that had hung over their lives for so long was finally starting to lift. Maggie could hardly believe it. She couldn't remember the last time she had felt this much hope. The bills that had once seemed so impossible to pay were now being covered, not just by Mr. Carter's initial donation, but by the help that came after. More people heard her story, and more offers of support poured in. There were days when Maggie felt overwhelmed by the kindness of strangers, but she never took it for granted. Every bit of help felt like a gift, a reminder that there was still good in the world. Maggie found herself thinking more and more about Mr. Carter's offer to share her story. At first, the idea had scared her. She wasn't the type to stand in front of crowds or speak to reporters. But now, with Timmy on the mend and the world opening up in ways she had never imagined, she started to see the potential in telling her story. Maybe it could inspire others who were struggling, just like she had been. One evening, as Maggie sat beside Timmy's bed, she made her decision. She would share her story, but on her own terms. It wouldn't be something forced or uncomfortable. It would be a way to help others, a way to make sure that the kindness she had received didn't go unnoticed. The next day, Maggie called Mr. Carter to let him know what she had decided. "I'm ready," she said, her voice full of determination. "I'll do it. I'll share my story." Mr. Carter was pleased to hear it. "I knew you'd come to this decision," he said warmly. "You have a powerful story, Maggie. People need to hear it." With that, Maggie began to prepare. She wasn't sure how she would tell the world about her journey, but she knew that somehow she would find a way. And as she thought about it, she realized that it wasn't just about the money or the treatment anymore. It was about something deeper. It was about the connection between people, the kindness that could change lives, and the power of love that could keep going, no matter how tough life got. The first time she shared her story publicly, it was at a local event. She spoke to a small group of people, many of whom were moved by her words. As she finished, people came up to her, offering encouragement, advice, and more support. It felt strange to be in the spotlight, but it also felt good. It felt like she was finally doing something meaningful. Maggie wasn't just a woman trying to save her son anymore. She was someone who had experienced hardship and found hope, and now she was sharing that hope with others. And in doing so, she realized that her journey wasn't just about getting her son the help he needed. It was about finding a way to help others too. Maggie couldn't believe how quickly everything had changed. Just a few weeks ago, she was a mother, exhausted and desperate, trying to keep her son alive, singing on the streets for a few coins. Now her life felt like it had been transformed in ways she never thought possible. Timmy was doing much better. The doctors had done their part. And now her son was back to his old self, running around, laughing, and playing like nothing had ever been wrong. For Maggie, this was the greatest gift of all. She spent her days watching Timmy grow stronger, and every moment felt like a blessing. But that wasn't all that had changed. Maggie was also finding new opportunities for herself. Word of her story spread quickly, and soon she was being invited to events and interviews. At first, the thought of speaking in front of people made her nervous. She wasn't used to being in the spotlight, but as time went on, she began to realize how important her voice could be. People wanted to hear about her journey, how she had fought for her son and how, despite all the odds, they had made it through. They wanted to know about the kindness that had saved her family and about the powerful bond between a mother and her child. Maggie started to speak at local charity events, telling her story to anyone who would listen. She wasn't just sharing her pain anymore. She was sharing her hope, her strength, and her belief that anything was possible if you didn't give up. Slowly, Maggie found that her words had the power to reach others, to inspire people who had given up on their dreams or were struggling with their own challenges. It felt strange at first. Maggie had never thought of herself as someone who could inspire others. She was just a mother trying to take care of her son. But now, as she saw the impact her story was having, she realized that sharing her journey was about more than just her family. It was about reminding people that no matter how hard life got, there was always a way forward. As she stood on stage at a community fundraiser one evening, Maggie spoke to a crowd of people who had come together to raise money for children's medical treatments. She talked about her son, about how she had felt when she first learned about his illness, and how helpless she had been. But then she told them about the people who had helped her, the strangers who had believed in her when she didn't believe in herself, and the kindness that had changed her family's life forever. By the time she finished, there wasn't a dry eye in the room. Maggie's story had touched everyone who had heard it, and that night, the donations to the fundraiser far exceeded expectations. The money would go toward helping more families like hers, families who needed a hand when things seemed impossible. After the event, a woman approached Maggie with tears in her eyes. "You've inspired me," she said. "I've been struggling for so long, and hearing your story gives me hope." Maggie smiled, a warmth spreading through her heart. "I'm just a mother who never gave up," she replied. "If I can do it, anyone can." And that was the moment Maggie realized that sharing her story wasn't just about getting help for her family. It was about helping others find their own strength. As she looked around at the faces of the people who had gathered to listen to her, she knew she had found her purpose. This was her new life, one filled with hope, kindness, and the chance to make a difference in the world. In that moment, Maggie understood that the best part of her journey wasn't just the help she had received. It was the opportunity to give back, to share her experience, and show others that no matter how dark the path may seem, there is always light at the end. Maggie's life had changed in ways she had never imagined. When she first started singing on the street corner, she had no idea that her voice would lead her to a place of hope and opportunity. Now, not only was her son Timmy healthy and full of life, but Maggie had also found herself in a position to help others. She had become an unexpected source of inspiration for those who had heard her story. As the days passed, Maggie continued to speak at various events, sharing her journey with more people. Her confidence grew with each speech, and she began to see the true impact of her words. People would approach her after the talks, thanking her for being so open and honest. Many of them told her that hearing her story had helped them through their own struggles. One evening, after a particularly moving talk, a man approached Maggie. He was dressed in a simple suit, but his eyes were filled with a deep kindness that reminded her of Mr. Carter, the man who had helped her so much. He introduced himself as Mark, and said he had heard about her story through a friend. He had been so moved by what Maggie had shared that he wanted to help. "I believe in what you're doing," Mark said, his voice sincere. "I've seen how your story has touched so many people, and I want to help you reach even more." Maggie smiled, surprised by his offer. "What do you mean?" she asked, unsure of what he was suggesting. Mark explained that he worked for a foundation that helped raise funds for families in need, especially for children who were battling serious illnesses. He had been inspired by Maggie's ability to turn her struggle into something positive and wanted to offer her an opportunity to work with the foundation. "We have the resources to help even more families," Mark said. "But we need someone who can truly connect with people, someone who has lived the experience." Maggie's heart skipped a beat. This was another opportunity to make a difference. This was what she had always hoped for. She could be part of something bigger than herself, something that could help many more families in need. "I'd be honored," Maggie said, her voice full of gratitude. "This is what I've always wanted, being able to help others the way I was helped." With Mark's help, Maggie started working with the foundation. She traveled to different cities, sharing her story and speaking at events to raise awareness and funds for children's medical care. Every time she spoke, she felt a sense of fulfillment. It wasn't just about the money. It was about the hope she could give to others. The connections she made with families who were going through similar struggles brought her so much joy. As Maggie's work with the foundation grew, she began to realize just how far she had come. She had started with nothing, just a mother desperate to save her son. But now, she was part of something that could change the lives of so many others. The pain and heartache she had endured had turned into a source of strength and inspiration for others. One evening, as Maggie stood on stage at another charity event, she saw a familiar face in the crowd. Mr. Carter had come to see her speak. After the event, he approached her with a warm smile. "You've come full circle," he said. "I'm proud of you, Maggie. You've taken your pain and turned it into something beautiful." Maggie smiled back at him, her heart full. "I couldn't have done it without your help," she said. "You gave me a chance when I didn't even know if there was hope." Together, they looked out at the crowd. Maggie knew that she had made a difference in the lives of many. And as she walked off the stage, surrounded by people who shared her vision, she knew that her journey was far from over. It was only just beginning. Maggie stood by the window of her small apartment, looking out at the city lights. It had been months since she had first met Mr. Carter, and everything had changed since then. Her life felt like it had shifted from a place of hopelessness to one full of possibility. Timmy was healthy and thriving, and she had found her purpose, helping others who were facing the same struggles she once did. Now she wasn't just a mother trying to save her son. She was a voice of hope for families in need. Maggie had become a speaker for the foundation, traveling to different cities and sharing her story. Each time she spoke, her words reached someone who was struggling, someone who needed to hear that there was a way forward, just as she had once needed to hear it herself. But as much as Maggie had embraced this new role, she never forgot the power of music. Her voice and guitar had been her first way of reaching out, her first way of asking for help. It was music that had led her to this new life, and she knew it still had a role to play in the future she was building. One evening, after a long day of meetings and speeches, Maggie sat down with her guitar. Timmy had fallen asleep, and the apartment was quiet except for the soft strumming of her instrument. She hadn't played much lately. Her focus had been on speaking at events, raising funds, and spreading her message. But tonight, she wanted to reconnect with the music that had started it all. As the familiar chords filled the room, Maggie felt a sense of peace wash over her. She began to sing softly, her voice gentle and full of emotion. The song was one she had written long ago, before all of this had started. It was a song about hope, about never giving up, about the love that kept her going even when the world felt heavy. She closed her eyes and let the music carry her back to the beginning, to those quiet moments on the street corner when she had sung for the chance to make a difference. Back then, all she wanted was to see her son well again. Now she had so much more than that. She had found a community of people who shared her passion, who were all working together to make the world a better place. Maggie's phone buzzed, interrupting the peaceful moment. She picked it up, and it was a message from Mr. Carter. "I just wanted to check in and see how everything is going. You're doing incredible work, Maggie. Keep it up." Maggie smiled at the message. She had kept in touch with him, updating him on her progress and the work she was doing with the foundation. He had always been there, encouraging her every step of the way. He had believed in her from the start, when no one else had. As she set the guitar down and prepared to head to bed, Maggie realized how far she had come. She had gone from a mother singing on the street corner, desperate to save her son, to a woman who had found a way to help others, to make a real difference. But she knew her work wasn't finished yet. There were still so many families who needed help, so many children who needed care. And Maggie was determined to keep working, to keep sharing her message, and to keep making a difference. Tomorrow, she would be on the road again, speaking at another event, helping to raise awareness, and inspiring others with her story. But tonight, as she looked out at the city lights, Maggie knew that her journey had led her to exactly where she was meant to be. She had found her voice, and with it, she would continue to build a future of hope, one song, one story, and one act of kindness at a time. Maggie sat on the steps outside her apartment, gazing at the rising sun. The city was just waking up, and the streets were slowly becoming busier as people began their daily routines. It had been a long journey for Maggie, and the path had not always been easy. But now, as she looked back on everything she had accomplished, she knew she had come a long way. Her son Timmy was flourishing. He was no longer the sick, frail child he had once been. His laughter filled their home, and his energy brought a brightness to Maggie's life that she hadn't realized she had been missing. He was starting school soon, and Maggie couldn't wait to see the world through his eyes again. He was healthy, happy, and full of life. Maggie's heart swelled with pride as she thought about how far he had come. Maggie's work with the foundation had grown as well. She had traveled to countless cities, sharing her story and speaking at events. The more she spoke, the more people reached out to her, offering support and asking how they could help. She was no longer just a woman who had fought for her son's health. She was now a voice for those who were struggling, a symbol of hope for families facing challenges they never thought they could overcome. As Maggie worked with the foundation, she met other mothers, fathers, and families who were going through the same things she had once faced. They listened to her story and found comfort in knowing they weren't alone. Many of them reached out to her for advice or just to share their own struggles. Maggie's heart grew with every conversation, and she knew she was making a difference in ways she had never imagined. One afternoon, as Maggie sat in a meeting room with Mark from the foundation, she realized just how much impact her story had had. The foundation had raised more money than ever before, and they were able to provide more medical treatments to children who needed them. Maggie had become part of something much bigger than herself, something that was changing lives all over the country. "You're doing incredible work," Mark said, smiling at her. "When we first started, we never expected this kind of response. You've helped us make real change." Maggie smiled back at him, but there was no pride in her expression. She had never done this for recognition or praise. She had done it because she had to, because she knew what it was like to be desperate for help, to be in a place where nothing seemed possible. She was just a mother who had found a way to fight back, and she was going to keep fighting as long as she could. Later that evening, Maggie sat down to write in her journal. She had started writing down her thoughts at the beginning of this journey, as a way to process everything that had happened. Now, looking back at the pages, she was amazed at how much she had learned and how far she had come. The road hadn't been easy, but it had been worth every step. Maggie closed the journal and looked at Timmy, who was playing outside with his friends. She could hear his laughter ringing through the air, and for the first time in a long while, Maggie felt at peace. She had found a way to give back, to help others, and to build a future full of possibilities. As the sun set, painting the sky in shades of pink and orange, Maggie knew that her journey wasn't over. There would always be more work to do, more lives to touch, and more people to help. But for the first time in years, Maggie felt like she was exactly where she was meant to be. And no matter what the future held, Maggie knew one thing for sure. She was ready to face it with hope, love, and the strength to keep moving forward.